David, in a moment of adversity, he erupts with this cry. It's a prayer. We understand it's a psalm. And I know that we track with it in some ways, even with familiarity, but we have to understand that what David is crying out for, what had become anything but familiar to him. David opens in Psalm 27, and I know that the commercialized part of it is this one thing I ask. And this is what I'm going to seek. That David is communicating what his life is now been defined by. David has been apprehended. David has been joyfully conquered. David has been possessed. God has come to him. He's touched him. He's actually done something deep on the inside of him to change him, and not just change him by way of a language that he now has. Right? David's language is revealing a lifestyle. What it is that David is praying out, he's actually communicating what his life is now, the definition or the governance of. David is saying, yes, this one thing. But this one thing is not being communicated in a moment or a season of convenience. Does anybody feel like they're living in a season of convenience? Does anybody feel like you're living in a season that is absent of adversity? Right? We must realize that this cry that comes out of the heart of David, this is a man that has been possessed in the pursuit of God and his presence. David says there's one thing that my life is going to be about. I understand that there's many things, but my life has been simplified. In the consideration of many things, I understand that there is one thing that I'm after. Where there's the opportunity to be about all kinds of things. Ambitions, dreams, material things, the love of the world, the pursuit of the American dream, and so on and so forth. I understand that the opportunities to be about a variety of things, it abounds. But David actually starts with a day of adversity. David is not living in an easy moment. There is crisis that has produced the cry, so to speak. And David opens Psalm 27, and he says that there are adversities by the way of adversaries. There are enemies. There are those that want to devour his flesh, and there is war that surrounds him. Man, we're living in a moment of history where maybe we never actually believed it was going to be possible, right? Maybe we read the Bible and we understand certain things that the scriptures communicate, and we know that in Psalm 2, David writes that there is coming a moment, a season that is going to fall on the globe. It will be a global scenario where the nations will begin to rage, where there will be a demonic unity that grips the globe. And every nation will be unified unto a singular objective. Why do the nations rage? Against the Lord and his anointed one. There's coming a season where the whole world is going to unite, and the objective will be a hatred of God and his choice of his son as the ruler of all creation. And they will not only hate Yahweh and his son, but they will hate those that love him and love his ways. And there will be a hostility that saturates the world. And the end time scenario will be one where the nations will rage. The nations. And there's no exemption of a particular country of our preference. Right? What the Bible is communicating is that the whole world will be unified. Man, and maybe you think to yourself like, yeah, right, no way. There's no way that any one particular thing could bring the whole world together in a united effort or front. Well, COVID has done in a matter of weeks what we at one point thought was going to be virtually impossible. It has brought the world together. It has unified the world with a particular focus. It is a language that has saturated the world and has created a system that is right now being installed. There is an end time infrastructure that is being arranged right now. And if we believe the Bible, then we understand that in the end times, there is going to be a global infrastructure. There is going to be a platform that is set, and there is going to be a hostility against those who love the Lord and love his Son. There will be a hostility towards those who love God and those who love his Son. And there will be no nation that is exempt from the nations raging. And we know that Jerusalem will be a crisis point before the skies crack and the king returns. And David is communicating a glimpse of this adversity in an immediate way that is affecting his heart, because what is happening in an immediate way is setting his attention on something that is not immediate, but it is ultimate. And I would suggest to you that these are wonderful days to consider what is ultimate. And what is ultimate should inform and inspire what is immediate. What is ultimate should give us a clear focus as to what we are going to be about, the way we are going to conduct our lives, how we are going to set things up, and the government that we are going to live under. I understand that there's one seated in the White House, but my heart is yielded to the one that's seated on the throne. And what is ultimate should inform what is immediate. What is ultimate should create an inspiration for how we live our lives in what we have to consider that is immediate. And David is saying that right now there is an immediate crisis, and this sense of immediate is helping me to fasten my gaze on what is ultimate. And he says there's adversaries and enemies. There's those that are coming to devour my flesh, and there is war that has surrounded me. And he says, I know that in the midst of what I seem to be going through, there are many things that I could be asking for. But he says, this one thing I ask. David's not looking for breakthrough. David's not asking for strategy. David's not seeking some sort of worldly wisdom. David's not asking for the routing of his enemies. David understands that if there's one thing that I get to ask for, I understand not just what the one thing is, but I know what the one thing is because I realize what the main thing is. And David says that I understand that I could get all of these other things, but I could have these other things and not be possessed by what is the main thing. But David says if I get the main thing, then the main thing will help to frame in all of these other things. Because the implication is that I can't possibly see or interact with all of these other things the right way unless I get the main thing the right way. Because it's the main thing being established in my life that helps to bring governance to my perspective on how I'm actually supposed to handle all of these other or lesser things. Because to David, everything else is less in the consideration of the overall beauty and worth of this man Jesus. And David has been overwhelmed by the beauty and the worth of Jesus. And he says, if there's one thing that I get, this is what I want. If you got one thing, what would it be? David said in a moment of adversity, I have to have you, Jesus. In a moment of crisis, I gotta have you, Jesus. In a moment where there's enemies that abound, and I get to ask for one thing, I know the one thing that I want. And he says, this one thing I ask, and this is what I will seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and to gaze deeply into the beauty of his face, and to be completely overwhelmed by what is the ultimate obsession. David is not a man who is merely just fleshly fascinated. He is deeply overwhelmed because he has been joyfully conquered. And David is a man that has been possessed. He is consumed. He is overtaken. This love that he has for Jesus is not circumstantial. It's not circumstantial. David is in a moment of crisis, and he's loving Jesus in a moment of crisis. It's like Paul says in Philippians 4, I'm not talking to you because I have some lack, because I have some want. He said, because see, I've actually learned how to live in opposite extremes. He said, I've been through seasons with lack and sorrow and suffering and trial and pressure and persecution. He's like, and then I've lived in opposite extremes where there's been mountaintop highs and celebrations and all types of joy-filled outcomes and breakthrough. He says, but I've learned the secret. He said, because there is a secret. He said, it's Christ in me that actually gives me the strength to do all things. And I can do all things through Christ who is in me. Paul understands my devotion no longer demands a certain context. My devotion no longer demands a certain context or experience. You don't have to give me a luxurious life in order for me to love you. You don't have to give me a certain governmental structure in order for my heart to be on fire. You don't have to give me a certain lifestyle with relationships and opportunities in order for me to be faithful to you the way that I know you long to have someone faithful to you. He's saying, I've learned the secret. I understand that there is a power that is at work on the inside of me that actually gives me the strength. It gives me the strength to be committed to what I know I'm supposed to be committed to, even when there's crisis and I don't just always get it in convenience. And David is in a moment of crisis. And in a moment of crisis, it seems to refine what he's crying out for. Because if you've ever been in a real hour of trouble, then you understand that pressure has a way of pushing us into prayer that gets really simple. With loud cries and tears, Jesus lifted his voice to the one that he knew was able to save him. Pressure, persecution, trial, trouble, suffering has a way of refining the cry of our heart and emptying or sifting all of the other and lesser things that are no longer as worth it as we once thought they were worth it. And David is being pressed. And when he's being pressed, this cry erupts. God, if you could give me one thing. One thing. David says, it's you. It's you. You are actually what I want. You are actually what I'm after. You are actually now, you're what does it for me. I've realized that as I've searched the world over, I'd never found one like Jesus. I've searched the world over and still not found one like Jesus. David is in a moment of trouble and in an hour of trial. His heart is being refined and this singular cry is erupting from deep on the inside. And as this cry is being released, we have the beauty of these words to glean from. But we have to understand that David's cry wasn't just in case of emergency, break glass. It wasn't just in case of emergency, break glass. What we need to understand is that at times the blessing is in the breaking. Because the breaking has a way of bringing us into a place of devotion that God has always longed for, that has just not yet become normal for us, because the conveniences have not yet produced enough pressure in order to press us into praying the thing that God is looking for. But David's life is not just in response, to the trouble. Right? You see, some of us, we don't get really fiery until we get into trouble. And this is when I say the blessing is in the breaking. Because at times the blessing is in the pressure. The blessing is in the hostility. The blessing is in the pain. The blessing is in the tears. The blessing is in the loud cries. Why? Because God understands that when you are pressed, it pushes you into a place of devotion that may not necessarily be normal for you. And here we are crying out, God, I want things to be easy again. And he says, I know you want things to be easy again. But if things were easy again, I wouldn't have you the way that I have you right now. If things were easy again, you wouldn't have the life of devotion that you have right now. You see, because there's something about the dis-ease in your life, the disruption of your comfort in your life. You see, it wakes you up early in the morning and it has you pacing your floor with tears running down your face. You see, there's something about the disruption of your luxury in your life that keeps you up late at night praying and crying out and interceding. There's something about the lack of convenience and something about the trouble and the pressure when it hits you that you begin to fast and pray. And I know that at times we cry out for convenience. But God is wanting to conform us to the image of his Son. And there's just a certain place of our being transformed, our being conformed, our being actually changed that just doesn't happen as well as it should in places where we are not being moved because the pressure of our life is not yet moving us into a place of devotion. And David says, my devotion is not in response to my issues. David's devotion is not in response to his problems. David's life has become stabilized in a radical way. David has a place of normal that is very abnormal to most that are around him. David is not crying out simply because of crisis. And if we don't understand a bigger picture of David's life, then we very easily look at a singular picture or a snapshot and think that he is behaving the way that most of us do. Well, you know, I've had to pray more because I just got a lot going on now. Solomon, in reflection of his father's life, in Psalm 132, many believe that this is Solomon writing, and he's writing it about his dad. And it's subtitled, at least subheaded, however you want to reference it. The opening at the top of Psalm 132 in some translations says the remembrance of the anguish of the burden of God. And he's reflecting about his dad. And he writes about his dad, a man that lived with a jealousy, a man that had been gripped with a burden, a man whose life had been conquered by a singular desire, a singular pursuit. There was a laser focus that David had about his life. And Solomon, getting to watch his dad live, is now writing in remembrance as he is thinking about his dad. And he says, this is who my dad was. And in Psalm 132, when we read verses 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, in reflection of, I'm sure, things that he had heard his dad cry out for, he writes, and he says, I will give no sleep to my eyes, nor rest to my life, nor will I even lay down in my own bed until I find a place for the Lord to dwell. David had a jealousy. And this jealousy came out of what he had experienced. And David is communicating in the only way that he knows how, the price that he is willing to pay in order to pursue God's presence. He's saying, if I have to give up sleep, I'll give up sleep. I'll give no sleep to my eyes. I won't even lay down. I won't enter into my own bed. He's trying to calculate the cost that he is considering is worthy to be paid in order for the pursuit of his life to be apprehended. And he's trying as best as he knows how to say how worthy the pursuit of God's presence is in his life. And Solomon is reflecting, reminding himself about the way that he saw his dad live. Because the presence meant everything to David. The presence meant everything to David. David made room for the presence in his life. He made room for the ark. Not just in his own personal life, but because of what he established personally. God trusted him to establish it publicly. In 1 Chronicles 15, we have these challenging words in verses 1 and 2. It says that David built houses for himself, verse 1. But in verse 2, it says David made room for the ark. I would suggest to you that these are days to make room for the ark. That these are not days to be caught up in a bunch of worthless worldly focuses. These are not days to be flirting with sin and the satisfaction of the system of the age. These are not days to be dating devils and seeing how far we can push the line of compromise. These are days to find out, to calculate, to consider the cost of going all in with Jesus, and then as a response to the beauty and the worth of Jesus, making as much room as we possibly can for the ark of God's presence in our life. Because what David knew personally, God created a door for him to establish it publicly and corporately. You see, because we'll always have difficulty establishing something publicly that has not yet been deeply rooted within us in a private, personal way. You see, because out of the well of what gets established personally, we then see the consequences or the byproduct of that whenever God invites us into or unto something that is now public, meaning everyone else now gets to see what God has always been able to see. And 1 Chronicles 15 communicates to us that David made room for the ark. Do you have room for the ark in your life? Do you actually have room for the ark in your life? Because this isn't just to assume or to suggest that because we have activities and systems that automatically means that we've made room for the ark. Because David tells them, we're bringing the ark back. But as you come down a couple of verses, we actually find out part of the reason why. David says, because in the days of Saul, we never went looking for it. In the days of Saul, we never went looking for it. A period of almost 70 years where they had systems, where they had organization, where they had military prowess, where they had all types of conduct and things that they had given themselves to. But in the midst of all of the activities, all of the formalities, all of the systems, all of the daily priorities and the things that they were pursuing, David recognizes, as he's reflecting on what is almost a 70-year period, that period, that moment in time, that was absent of something that is actually not just another line item on a list of priorities. But David says 70 years almost went by where we had no jealousy to go looking for the ark. But David says it's time. It's time. It's time to go looking for the ark. It's time to make room for the ark. It's time to, even as commercialized as it may sound, it is time to be a one thing type of people. In a moment of history where the world is shaking, so are many of our hearts. But David is actually revealing the recipe for success in seasons of shaking. David is not saying that we should give our attention to all of the lesser things that seem to abound and that seem to be multiplied on every side. David is saying that in seasons of shaking, it is a great opportunity that while everything is shaking, we are to be a people that are beholding. Beholding is actually the recipe for success in seasons of shaking. Because you become what you behold. And many of us are becoming things that we don't like because we're beholding things that are producing outcomes that we don't like. Possibly the reason that we look so much like the news is because we spend so much time looking at the news. Maybe the reason we are starting to look like the comment section on Facebook is because we spend so much time beholding the comment section on Facebook. But David is revealing that in seasons of shaking, we are to be a people that give ourselves in a greater way to beholding. Because beholding is actually what disarms all of the influences from the multiplied adversities that may surround us and the shaking that it desires to produce on the inside of us. The world does not just have a desire to shake. The world is shaking because the influence of the shaking wants to get inside of your heart, and it wants to affect your life, and it wants to sever you from a place of beholding so that you can be buried by the influence of the adversity. But these are days for lovers of Jesus to rise to the occasion. These are days for sons and daughters to have a singular pursuit. These are days for the refining of our lives by the pressure that is actually being applied to our lives to produce a singular cry. Man, if I could have one thing, and don't just think that it's automatic. Don't just think that it's automatic, because it's not. It's not. What do I mean by way of automatic? That we all are going to have deeply buried within us, that when crisis begins to crack our lives, that what erupts from the inside is going to be revealed. Man, you may be sitting where you're sitting and you may think to yourself, I don't like how I've been handling the season that we've been in. Because pressure and crisis has a way of revealing what has been buried beneath the surface of the image that we know how to prop up and keep alive, because the button hasn't yet been pushed hard enough to reveal what is actually happening and alive deep on the inside. But when enough trial hits my life and enough pressure gets applied and it squeezes out of me what's actually going on inside of me, You may think to yourself, man, I don't know who this guy is. Like, I don't know where this came from. Like, man, that's not me. Like, that's not really who I am. No, that is really who we are. The problem is there's just not yet been enough pressure in order to squeeze the real us out of the image that we know so well to prop up for other people so that they can think about us what we want the facade or the filter to present or to presume. So don't just think that it's automatic, that because we say we love him, that because we have the language, that when pressure hits my life, that what's going to erupt and come out is going to be something that is in alignment with the language that I've perfected. Because sometimes what comes off our lips is not what comes out of our life. Sometimes what comes off our lips is not what comes out of our life. And so we can be in the right place. We can be surrounded by the right people. And we cannot automatically guarantee that as a default or as a byproduct of being in the right place, surrounded by the right people, or even having access to the right person, that we are going to become the right product over time. Solomon is reflecting about his dad. And he's reflecting about this one thing, jealousy, that conquered his dad's life. This singular pursuit that created a framework. This one thing is now going to inform how I handle all of these other things. Because we can't also think that David had some monk-style life, meaning that he just had the privilege of locking up in a cave, and that's why it was easy for him to love Jesus, and he never actually went through anything, or he didn't have any real responsibilities, and so it was just easy for him. David led the greatest kingdom on the face of the earth in his moment in history. David was a king. David was a military leader. David wasn't perfect. He was perfected by no means, but he was surrendered. He was subjected to God's government in his life. And even when he fell forward into the loving arms of Jesus and into the presence of God. So David was by no means perfected because of this pursuit, but he was subjected to God's government in his life. And this one thing created a sense of governing. It provided a frame or a lens, and it gave him a way to interpret and interact with everything else that he was responsible for. The one thing informed him how to handle every other thing that God gave him to steward. And Solomon is reflecting on this. And I'm sure that as Solomon is writing in Psalm 132, that he's considering his own moment where he had his day of opportunity. You see, 2 Chronicles 1 gives us Solomon's opportunity. And it says that God visits Solomon in the night via a dream. And he asks him in the dream, "Ask of me anything you want." 2 Chronicles 1:7. Ask of me anything you want. Solomon, if you could have one thing, what would you ask for? What would it be? Would you want to enlarge your kingdom? Would you want to increase your material wealth, your influential value? Would you want to expand the boundaries of your platform? Solomon, would you want power in order to overcome, to conquer, to rout all of your enemies? Solomon, if you could have one thing, what would you ask me for? God visits Solomon in a dream. And you can almost only assume that because of who Solomon was, being the son of David, that he was trying to search the heart of Solomon You see, questions have a way of searching what's in our hearts. And God is a master communicator. And he understands that questions are critical to communication. And so when God is asking questions, it's not because there's information that he's lacking. Right? It's not that we're going to fill him in or clue him in somehow. Or we're going to provide an answer that is going to so wow him by our intellect. Adam, where are you? Jacob, what is your name? God is a master communicator. And he knows how to drill deep into the core, beyond all the fluff, the stuff, the images, the small talk, the bush hiding, the angel wrestling. He knows how to drill deep into the core of the issue and in one question, bring it all up. And to be like, oh, okay, so that's where we're going to start. Like, all right. Like, man, how are you? We're going to skip all the small talk. And we're going to jump deep into the stuff. Solomon, you get one question. What are you going to ask for? Because you've grown up in the right house. I've put you next to the right man. You've been in the right place, surrounded by the right type of person and or people. I've given you access that should have conditioned your heart to bring you to the place where the cry should have been refined because of the way that you were raised. But Solomon, I have to hear it from you. Because again, all of these variables, all of these factors, I can't just automatically think that it's going to guarantee that what's going to erupt from the inside of you when the inside of you gets cracked in order to reveal what's actually longing on the inside. What's going to be awakened whenever pressure or the moment grants access to know what actually matters to you. Because in seasons of sorrow or trial, what really matters seems to come up and come off of our lips. And he says, Solomon, what one thing do you want? But you can almost just hear it, that God is on the edge of his seat. Is what's in you what was in David? Solomon, are you going to say it? Are you going to say it? Do you have the same one thing desire that your dad had? Do you have the same singular jealousy that was in your dad? Solomon, is what your heart is on fire for, that has given your life purpose, that has created a frame for you to interact with others and even life circumstance. Solomon, I'm trying to find out what's actually on the inside of you. Solomon, if you get one request, what is the main thing? Solomon, I'm coming to you because I'm searching your heart, because the eyes of the Lord are searching to and fro throughout the earth, looking for a heart that is fully his, that's not compartmentalized. Man, like, well, God, I'll give you this compartment, and I'll give you access to this conversation, and I'll let you rest in this category because I really need a little bit of blessing here, and I'll let you kind of like give me a little bit of Jesus over here too because it would help me, and I could use it as leverage into or unto these things. Solomon, I have to find out, do you love me for me? Do you love me for me? Man, I'm telling you, in this moment of history, God is raising up a people that are going to love his son for his son. Hear me. No groom wants to arrive on his wedding day and find out when he stands there to walk down the aisle that his bride is only interested in him because of the compensation package. No groom wants to feel when he's walking down that aisle, that the bride actually has no interest in who he is. She doesn't love him for him, but she loves him because of what he's able to do for her. She loves him because of the life that he's able to create for her. She loves him because of the retirement package that she's going to inherit, because of the marital status that she's going to give herself to the groom, yet it's going to lack an actual interest in the groom himself. No groom wants to walk down the aisle and realize that the bride is there out of duty or obligation, and that it actually is not being fueled by a real love or delight. And God is raising up a people that are going to delight in his son, not because of an easy life, that are going to actually have a joy-filled, on fire, wild and madly in love with Jesus type devotion, but not just out of obligation. And God is searching the heart of Solomon because he wants to know, and he must confront him in order to find out what is happening inside of him. Solomon, you have to say it. What one thing are you going to ask for? And Solomon says, Lord, give me wisdom so that I can know how to govern your people. Your love for Jesus is not leverage into or unto the other things that actually matter most to you. Your devotion is not some manipulative tool in order to rub him the right way so that he will move in the way that you hope he will, to give you the things that you desire other than him. Lord, give me wisdom. That sounds amazing. It sounds really godly. It sounds simple and pure. But even though it sounds amazing, it's not the most amazing thing that he could have asked for. Because in the moment where we get one thing, any lesser thing other than the main thing is the wrong thing. And it's the wrong thing because it's not the main thing. Give me wisdom, Lord, because I want to know how to govern your people. Well, let me just inform you, Solomon, your leadership of God's people is not more important than your love for God's Son. You can't leverage this cry unto things that matter most to you, because Jesus will not present himself as a bridge to be walked on in order for you to use him to access the things that you love other than him. And in the moment when the world is shaking, it is revealing, because of the shaking that is happening on the inside, what actually matters to us. Have you found yourself crying out more for the worldly things than you have the ultimate things? Revival is not being redefined in this season as to the return of our comfort. God is not redefining revival to now mean the reestablishing of our comfort or what once was. I don't believe things will ever be normal as we knew them to be normal ever again. Now, that's not to say that they'll be the same as they are now, but they just won't be normal as we knew normal to be previously or historically. But in this season, God is allowing the shaking in order for a people to rise. A people that will love his Son more than every other. A people that will love his Son more than they love leadership. That will love his Son more than they love finances. that will love his son more than they love the worldly things and the real estate of this life. As it was the confrontation of the rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10 at the thought of the cost of giving Jesus what it was that he'd wanted most, in the consideration, because he thought about it. He came to a calculated cost, and he considered that cost and determined that there was something that Jesus was not worthy of. And the Bible tells us in Mark 10 that after Jesus told him to go and give away all of his stuff and then to come back and follow him, that he thought about the cost of following Jesus the way that Jesus desired. And he was not willing to actually pay the price to follow Jesus the way that Jesus desired. Let me just encourage you. Jesus is not lowering the standard in order to cater to our comforts. He realizes what he is worth. The cost is the cost, and the call is the call. As it was in Revelation 5, when John began to weep because there was no one found worthy, the angel says to him in Revelation 5:5, "Don't weep, behold." I would exhort you tonight, don't weep, behold. There is one who has been found worthy. He is the Lamb that was slain, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root and the descendant of David. He has overcome, and he is worthy to open up the scrolls, to unlock its seals. Don't weep, behold. I believe that there's a beautiful invitation tonight. Regardless of how we've been responding to the hour of history that we are in, there is a beautiful invitation tonight to make the one thing the main thing, and to give God the response that he's looking for. Will you make room for me in this season? Will you make room for me in this season? Will you allow the apprehending of my presence to define your life in this season? Will you be one that in a moment of crisis and adversity, will you be one that will give your life to beholding? If there's one thing that I get to ask and that I get to be about, I want to be in your house. I want to see your face. I want to gaze deeply. I want to look on you continually. This is what my life will be about. But will you give it to him? Will you make room for the ark? David made room for the ark personally, and it's what came out of him when God granted him opportunity publicly. Is what's coming out of you publicly something that God has been imparting and establishing personally, privately? If not, it's time to make room for the ark. And if you feel like you've already made room, then it's time to give a greater yes. It's time to give the yes that he is worthy of. Well, what yes is he worthy of? Every yes and any yes that he asks for. I'm going to ask you to stand with me tonight. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to respond in a particular way. Because I'm asking the Lord to do something on the inside of us tonight that can only be done by the Spirit. As David writes in Psalm 42, and he says, as deep calls unto deep. You see, I'm not asking the Lord tonight to move us intellectually, where we just know how to amen things, but they don't actually bring a rearranging of our life. where we've just been conditioned over time to know the right response. We've adopted the right language, right? We know how to perform in the right environment. I'm not asking for us to be moved intellectually, where I now over time, I just know things. But the things that I know, the things that I agree with and that I even amen, they're not actually radically rearranging my life anymore. I just know how to amen them. I agree with them intellectually. I'm not asking us for us to be moved emotionally even, where some emotional zing or buzz for 1 or 2 or 3 days would just help to provide, almost like an overindulging on caffeine, where I just get all jacked up for a little while. I'm not asking us to be moved emotionally for something that's not actually going to land right and last long. Because it's got to be something more than emotionalism. It's got to be something way more than intellectualism. And David writes in Psalm 42, as deep calls unto deep, where we begin to feel the tug of God in a deep place on the inside of us. And that tug demands a response. That pull demands a response. The initiating of that desire that we begin to feel. The initiation of that wooing that we begin to experience. That it begins to move us as it begins to call to us. And I'm praying tonight that deep would call unto deep. And that in this season, that deep pull and tug of the Spirit would pull you away from all of the other and lesser worldly and worthless things that you have given your attention over to. That in a season of shaking, it would provide a season of refining. And that as deep calls unto deep, that a demand would be placed on the inside in a place that is hard to communicate. It's hard to tell you what it is that I feel. It's hard to let you in on the way that I know that God is stirring me. But even if I can't talk about it right, I know that I can at least respond to it right. Where, hey, listen, I can't make it make sense to you. Man, God is just pulling me in this moment. I can't make it seem right to you, but God is doing something on the inside. And I have to respond to it. I have to say yes to it. Because I feel like there's a window of opportunity where the tug of God, where the cry on the inside has been awakened, where deep is calling unto deep. And in the moment of opportunity, I want to give him my yes. In the hour of opportunity, I want to be one that will say yes to him. Whether he visits me by dream, whether he comes crashing in the hour of crisis, whether it's something spontaneous or prophetic or the unction of God that hits me in the secret place, I want to be one that's going to respond the way that he's looking for. Solomon, do you have the same response that your dad had? Is what was in David in you? Is what mattered most to David? Is it what matters most to you? Solomon, if I gave you the opportunity to have the thing that you are after, what would that outcome or destination, if it manifested, actually look like? Solomon, deep is calling unto deep. And what is going to rise out of the deep on the inside of you in the moment when God comes tugging? What is going to be revealed from the deep on the inside of you Because God is looking for a people that want Him for Him. God is looking for a people that will make His presence the main thing. Are you one of those in this hour of history that is going to give God the response that He's looking for? Will you be one that will be a one thing type of person? God is looking. The eyes of the Lord are searching to and fro on behalf of a heart that is fully His. That's not given over to the world. That's not given over to any other. But if I get one thing and you come tugging on the inside, I'll come running and I'll make room for the ark. Let your presence come crashing into my life in whatever way you want. Let your presence begin to radically redefine everything about my life in the way that you see fit. Let your presence remove and sift and sever other things and lesser things from the attention of my heart. God, if you will give yourself to me, then let your presence define me. Let your presence direct me. I will be one that will be about your presence if you will give yourself to me. If I can have access to you, then I will, out of that access, I will allow that access to completely reconfigure my life. I will make room. I'm going to take a moment and I'm just going to pray something it's going to seem super simple. But after I pray something that seems super simple, I'm going to ask you to respond to the tug of God. And we're just going to take a moment before the Lord. We'll close out in just whatever a time of worship or a worshipful response is going to look like. But I'm going to pray that God, by the power of His Spirit, would touch you in a deep enough way to actually move you unto the consideration to be radically redefined through the making room in your life for Him and His presence. So Lord, I'm asking you tonight, would you touch me tonight, Lord? Because if I can't muster it up, I can't make it happen. There's no way to fleshly manufacture this. But here I am tonight, Lord. And if you're looking for somebody that wants you, I might not have much, but I have a yes. I might not have all the gifts and the tools, but I have desire. There's a painful ache that's alive on the inside. I've got to have you, Jesus. And I'm asking you tonight, Lord, to touch your people. As deep calls unto deep, Holy Spirit, would you place a tug on the inside? Oh, lover of our souls, would you romance us tonight, Jesus? Would you woo us away from the world and all of its worldly things and the system that will fade? Would you romance us tonight, Jesus? Would you woo us? Would you call to us? Would you put a tug on our hearts? And as deep calls unto deep, move us tonight, Lord, I pray. Move us to make room. I'll make room. I'll give you the space that you're looking for. I'll open up my life to you, Lord. Put your presence in the center of my life and let it affect everything about me, Jesus. Tonight, as deep calls unto deep, I'm going to ask you if you feel the tug of God in a deep place on the inside. I'm going to ask you to respond to him tonight. And as a response, as you're moved by him, I'm going to ask you to make a move. And if you feel the tug of God in a deep place tonight, and you're just going to respond by way of offering him a yes, I will make room, then I'm just going to ask you to step out from where you are and to come and join in the front.